Ever since Bram Stoker wrote Dracula and popularized this horrifying blood-sucking entity in fiction, countless versions of this vampire have appeared in the history of pop culture, from numerous plays and movies based on Stoker's Dracula to popular fictional Draculas such as the Castlevania Dracula. His character has a long history of committing killings and notorious crimes. Among other things, Dracula is known for his bloodthirsty nature and tendency to lurk in the darkness, but he also has some very characteristic anatomical features that are seen across various versions of this entity. Today we will explore Dracula's anatomy in detail and tell you all about the mind-blowing physical characteristics of this bloodthirsty vampire. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How was Dracula created? The fictional entity known as Dracula was first introduced in Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he was portrayed as a 591 years old vampire who ruled over Castle Dracula and tried to gain control over more land. While Dracula had set up his base in Transylvania, the book's plot revolves around his attempts to extend his realms in England, while the protagonists try to put an end to this grand plan. While Dracula first appears to be young and around 45 years old at the start of the book, his character keeps taking a more youthful appearance as the story progresses. He had first ruled and died as Vlad Tepes in 1476, and had then returned to life as a bloodthirsty vampire known as Count Dracula. The book also suggests that Dracula aimed to raise an army of the undead, and a significant plot in the movie revolves around the protagonist's attempts to thwart these plans. The story's main protagonist was Jonathan Harker, who had moved to Dracula's castle to provide legal support to him. Eventually, we learn that Dracula had only kept Jonathan around to learn more about England before taking over the place. Jonathan Harker had a fiancée named Mina Harker, who later wrote about Dracula's creations in her diary, and even mentioned that he was dead and buried in a tomb inside the grounds of Castle Dracula. After lying dead, Dracula returned to life as a vampire and lived for hundreds of years, along with 3 vampires who were called the Brides of Dracula. Dracula soon initiates his plans by leaving for England on a ship, and even feeds on the blood of one of the crew members in order to sustain himself. He later shapeshifts into a wolf to leave the ship and ends up in close proximity to Mina Harker's friend Lucy Westenra. Dracula eventually starts visiting Lucy's room and drains her blood every night to keep existing, while also slowly turning into a vampire. While Lucy starts deteriorating, Dracula gains strength, and he even keeps a box of Transylvanian soil with him to protect himself. Dracula continues to feed off the blood of others to sustain his form, and he later even attacks Mina Harker to satiate his thirst. While Dracula first came to existence when Bram Stoker conjured up the idea for this vampire, it is said that Dracula was formerly known as Vlad Tepes, and that Stoker had sought inspiration from a former prince known as Vlad III to write this character. Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Tepes, was born in 1431 and ruled over Wallachia in the south of Transylvania. When he was 11 years old, he was abducted by Sultan Murad II, along with his younger brother. Murad had captured them and even trained them in warfare, science, philosophy, and art. As a child, Vlad would often witness Sultan Murad and his accomplices as they impaled their enemies, and he eventually turned into a ruthless killer himself. After his father's death, Vlad was released from captivity, and he then ruled over Wallachia while the Ottomans led an invasion against them. He defended his homeland and beheaded his opponent in just one blow. However, there was still a lot of restlessness among the common lords in Wallachia. Vlad invited hundreds of them to his banquet and ordered his men to stab and impale them by inserting a wooden or metal pole or stick through their bodies. This later inspired Bram Stoker to write Dracula's character based on Vlad's history, and it is even seen that Dracula finally dies in the same way which Vlad would attack his victims. Dracula's appearance explored in detail. According to Jonathan Harker's description of this character, Dracula was a thin, pale man with a long white mustache, pointy ears, and sharp teeth. He wore all black outfits and even had the appearance of an old man, and he was even described as a cruel man with a devilish smile. He usually spoke in a strange tone, and it was even observed that Dracula was a scholar who had a lot of knowledge about various fields of arts and sciences. This may be due to the education he received as Vlad, when the Ottomans abducted him, and one of the characters in the books, Van Helsing, even stated that Dracula seemed to know a branch of dark magic known as scholomance. As the book progresses, Dracula's appearance keeps getting more and more youthful, and it is suggested that he keeps getting younger after consuming the blood of his victims. He was even invisible in mirrors, which indicates that his character is not a living being, and he even appeared quite pale and lifeless. In the original book, Dracula's outfits did not have any red borders or satin trims on his cape, but later versions of this character show him wearing a cape with a red border. Dracula's lips were one of his most notable features, and they are described as blood-red lips that seem to be stained with actual blood. He also had long, broad hands with squat fingers and sharp talon-like nails, and his hands were one of his few body parts that were actually not hidden underneath his outfits. While there are different versions of Dracula, they all seem to share standard features such as sharp fang-like teeth, blood-stained lips, mustaches, tall and slender physique, and black and red outfits complete with a cape.
I'm glad that you've arrived safely.
Count Dracula.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house.
Can Dracula shapeshift at will? Dracula does have the ability to change his form according to his wishes, and he can grow tall or become small whenever he desires. He could even take the features of a bat, wolf, and a dog, among other animals, and one of his most unique features was his ability to shapeshift into fog or mist. Under the moonlight, Dracula could even travel in the form of dust and pass through tiny cracks or gaps while staying in his human form. Van Helsing described this as his ability to slip through any space, such as a tomb door or coffin, as if he were a strand of hair. As a vampire, Dracula could turn into anything he desired, but he was often seen turning into a wolf. After setting off for England on a ship, Dracula even fed on the blood of the ship crew, and later escaped the scene as a wolf. Fans have often wondered if he can even be considered a werewolf due to this ability, but the fact remains that he is a vampire who is only impersonating or temporarily taking the form of a wolf. Moreover, a werewolf's transformation is not controlled by his desires and depends on the moon, while a vampire reserves his decision to turn into a wolf whenever they desire. Was the sun an actual threat to his existence? In the original Dracula film, the sun was never a threat to Dracula's existence, and Count Dracula actually went out in the sunlight. While he preferred to step out at night, the sun did not threaten Dracula's existence. It only had some side effects on his powers, and Dracula could not transform into other shapes under the sun. Later versions of this character were shown to be impacted by the sun, wherein some vampires even turned to ash or disintegrate after being exposed to the sun's rays. Some of these vampires would return to their graves after the sun rose and stayed there to avoid sunlight, and this specific trope of the sun being a threat to his existence was only introduced in the 1922 Nosferatu film. In Castlevania, his castle was a part of his existence. In the Castlevania series, it was seen that Dracula's castle was also an evil entity of its own, and that it was a part of Dracula's existence. The place was known as Castlevania, and it was more than a building. It even symbolized Count Dracula's powers. When someone defeated Dracula, the castle building also started crumbling on its own, and Dracula would then use his evil powers to resurrect the place to its regular form. The castle was also not set in a particular location, and it could teleport to anywhere in the world, just like Dracula himself. Whenever Dracula resurrected the place, it usually appeared somewhere in Transylvania and Wallachia, but this location was not predetermined and kept changing according to the castle's wishes. Can Dracula reproduce the usual way? There has been no concrete evidence as to whether Dracula can reproduce by traditional means by being intimate with someone, and there are a lot of theories surrounding this. One theory suggests that Dracula may reproduce by biting someone or performing a ritual wherein they summon the devil or a higher power to bless their child. There are very limited numbers of vampires seen in literature, which does suggest that they don't breed the way regular humans do, and that they might have a ritual in place by which they have a child. Another ritual theory suggests that vampires can turn other humans by drinking some of their blood and also giving them some of their blood, which is followed by a painful transformation for the human. This method is often seen in modern fiction as a means to create new vampires, but this is not necessarily reproduction. Moreover, vampires are undead entities, which also raises the question of whether their body produces the bodily fluids required to conceive a child, but there have been instances where vampire children have been created traditionally. When it comes to vampires, it has been noted that their fangs are also a means to enable reproduction, and both male and female vampires can use their mouths to create a new vampire child. There have been theories that state that Dracula in himself is the mother as well as the father, but that is to say the sperm as well as the ovum that creates an offspring, and that his victims' wombs only act as a surrogate womb where this child can come to life. Further analysis of the Dracula book even suggests that Dracula would feed his blood to Mina, and that his blood was also mixed with his other bodily fluids, and that he reproduced with Mina in a way. When Mina and Jonathan Harker finally have a child together, a theory implies that this child was linked with Dracula somehow.
Stay back!
You can't kill me, Victor.
Is it possible to kill Dracula? Traditionally, there is a widespread belief that garlic is one of those items that can help one defend themselves against vampires. The pungent smell of garlic repulses any infected vampires with highly sensitive olfactory senses, and they try to avoid garlic as much as they can. Moreover, there are also some other well-known methods to kill Dracula, such as exposing them to sunlight or even a mirror. It is believed that the vampires' bodies have a genetic red blood cell deficiency, which causes them to become hypersensitive to sunlight. Other methods to kill Dracula or any vampires would be by crucifying them, luring them into holy grounds, or sprinkling them with holy water. There are plenty of stories about defeating vampires in this manner in fiction. They can also be defeated by decapitating their bodies and then burning them, which helps ensure that their body is destroyed and that they cannot return to life as a reanimated corpse. In the 19th century, people in England would even go as far as to rip out the hearts and lungs of any person they suspected was a vampire. Another fail-safe method to kill vampires or even Dracula would be impaling him and ensuring they put a stake through his heart. This was seen in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it was quite notably even seen in Bram Stoker's Dracula, wherein he was killed by putting a knife through his heart, and his throat was slashed with a knife. Since Dracula was an ancient vampire, his body crumbled to dust after this, and he was essentially defeated in the book. On another side, Lucy was killed in the books by putting a stake through her heart and stuffing her face with garlic for good measure. Bram Stoker incorporated various traditional methods of defeating Dracula and his army of vampires in his book, and some versions of this character were even destroyed by the sun in future adaptations. Conclusion. To sum it up, Dracula is indeed a pretty bloodthirsty vampire who has terrorized mortals for centuries and has become a huge part of pop culture. While there are various versions of this bloodthirsty entity that have different powers and abilities, we can say that Dracula does have some mind-blowing physical features, and his presence in movies and shows continues to make people cower in fear. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.